Alright, so my musket, I started obviously by unboxing and finding all the parts that I needed. Came with the 3 gouges, and I had some sandpaper on hand, but I didn't have a lot of tools that were recommended, and I figured it was probably best to get those before I started so that I wouldn't end up halfway through the job finding I really needed a different tool, trying to make it work with what I had on hand, and end up screwing something up since I couldn't get replacement parts for this gun. So I decided to hold off on starting the project until about week 2, when I got a bunch of things from Brownells. Got some needle files, punches, more sandpaper. I got Laurel Mountain Forge, maple finish, their stock sealer, and their barrel brown and degreaser. And then just a few other odds and ends to kind of help hold the work pieces, and some other tools I figured I might possibly need down the road. But the sandpaper and the gouges that it came with is really what I ended up using more than anything. I did try using my Dremel a couple times, but I found it was taking out more wood than I wanted to. Didn't have very good control with it, so I decided to just set that aside and just have patience, take some extra time, and put a little more elbow grease into it. But basically, I started with the lock plate, like the book said to. Started by putting way too much inletting black on there, getting it all over the place, and then having to clean the parts off pretty vigorously with some simple green, some hot water, and then sand the stock a bit to get all that black off of there so I could see what I was doing. The part about thin layers, didn't really stress it enough. You want very thin layers of inletting black, otherwise you're going to make a huge mess. But I got that on there, and I just started taking away pieces. It was mostly around the back here where I had to remove wood, and it was just kind of going around the edges with the gouges over and over until it started sitting down, and then going around it with sandpaper. Most trouble I had with this and with the whole project was inletting, just because I'm not very experienced at it. Just got to get more practice. But the biggest trouble I would have would be when I would get into like these round parts here, and I'd start kind of rounding off the edge coming up out of the wood, or coming back here on the butt plate. There'd be spots where I'd be trying to take out wood against the grain, and I'd end up taking out way too much, or I'd go in or out when I wanted to go straight. Just things I had to kind of learn to compensate for. But once I got the lock sitting the way I wanted to, and got the screws to meet and got them ground off nice and flush, I went back to the butt plate and the toe. These parts were a pretty good challenge for me because I don't have a good bench vise or stock cradle or anything like that to really work with. So this guy was sitting on a pair of sawhorses with some clamps on it, and it held it in place, but I couldn't get in a good position to really work on the angles right. So being able to inlet this took me probably more time than anything else I did on this gun. But once I got the butt plate sitting on there about how I wanted it, I turned over, started working on the toe plate. Had to file off probably close to 1/8 of an inch to get it to the angle that it needed to meet up at, as well as taking probably close to 1/2 of an inch off back here for it to sit down nice and flush. And then I had to obviously smooth off the back of the butt plate, take off all the excess there, and smooth off the corners. And once I got that done, moved on to the thimbles, where I stuck to just taking off brass, didn't take off any wood for these guys. Didn't really have much that I did need to take off. It was mostly just coming around the sides and cleaning those up. The curve to it was actually almost perfect. Just had to take a little off in the middle where some of the forge marks were kind of sticking out from it from the casting process. Got it set in, got it drilled through, and the screw in the barrel channel there, countersunk so it wouldn't stick up. And then did the same thing for the top one up here, countersunk the head and the barrel channel so it wouldn't be pushing on it. All in all, really easy process getting the thimbles in. From there, I actually held off on the barrel tenons like the book said, and I went to the trigger guard and the trigger, and The trigger really didn't need much anything at all. There's a little bit up at the front part I had to take off so it'd sit nice and flush, but once I got that off, it fit in there perfectly. The trigger guard, I could tell, was going to need a lot of alteration to get in there. So I decided, since I seem to have a lot more control taking the brass off with the thimbles, that I would use the same process and just file the brass on the trigger guard instead of trying to inlet the wood, because the brass just kind of sits there in the clamps and I can file it any way I need to. The wood, if I tried to go against the grain in any way, I started having a lot of problems, and obviously that's something I just need to practice and get a feel for. But I figured for safety's sake, I'd just stick to the brass, and it actually got a near perfect fit and came out looking pretty good in my opinion. And then from there I went over, fit the barrel tenons. I found the same thing again, trying to do the figure 8 motion with the sandpaper to fit the tenons was just giving me an uneven result. And so I just took the file to it and started filing it off a little at a time, constantly checking. Sure enough, got it done probably half the time I would have with the sandpaper and fit perfect. Fit both of those in there. I bought a set of calipers from Brownells when I bought all the other tools, and those are a huge help for me in knowing how much I need to take off, and made the process a lot simpler. And so I took some pretty good measurements on how far down the stock they were going to have to come. Drilled out my holes here, and see if we can get this where the camera can see it down right here. Then just drilled the pins right in, went in almost perfect. I did forget to tape up the back side of the stock when drilling through, and so a little bit of the wood did bust out. But once you stained it, couldn't really even see it anymore, so it wasn't a big issue, but definitely a point I'm going to have to remember next time I do this kind of thing. Then I went ahead and fit the sights on while I was doing this barrel work, and I did the exact same process. I just took the file to it. I didn't use a sandpaper. Worked way better for me. The ramrod here is actually the same maple laurel brown finish as the stock. I only used one coat on it though. That's why it gets that contrasting color. I thought it would look kind of nice if it didn't all blend together. But anyways, went on to the nose cap, which mine had to have a lot of the brass taken off so it wasn't pushing on the barrel, which meant just kind of getting in there with my needle files so I could keep all the same edges so that it would match the octagon pattern of the barrel and not be rounded off. Pretty easy, just took a bit of work getting in there to get the right angles on it, and then just countersinking the heads. That brass was really thin, so I cut the countersink by hands with a drill bit rather than actually using a power drill, because I didn't want to go all the way through and ruin my nose cap. But once I got that finished, I took everything apart, hung up the barrel and the stock and the ramrod. Started finish. I did one coat on the ramrod and one coat of sealer, 3 coats on the stock, not including some touch-up, and 2 coats of sealer, and then a total of 4 coats of browning on the barrel. And then in between the coats, I was polishing all the brass. I say polishing till the end. Started the brass polishing with 120 grit on the butt plate, but found I was putting in a lot of scratches, and so I went to 180 and 220, and then went all the way to 400 to give it a nice shine. And then on all the other brass parts, I just started at the 180 and worked to the 400. I didn't bother starting with the 120. Found out that worked much better for me. One part I skipped over was the shaping and sanding of the stock. Basically, I just started at the back end on top, and I tried to keep the stock in the same position as much as I could and work around the stock instead of turning it over. So I knew I was always looking at it from the same angle. I basically just started at the back with my rasp and pushed forward the whole way. Any spots that were high, I just went over them a little more until I got everything about flush. I didn't want to get it down to the point I was going to start cutting the metal. And then I just took the sanding block with some 120 grit and just started going all over it until it came out nice and even. And then 220 everything, including the metal, and wiped off all the dust before I did the finish. And all in all, I think it came out looking pretty nice. So I had a lot of fun with this project. Biggest issue I had with it was just the fact that I don't have any practice at inletting. That's just something I gotta work on more. I gotta get used to going against the grain, try not to round off the corners. Those were my biggest things. One thing I do want to do down the road though is learn to get some practice carving on some blank wood, some excess stuff, and then put a nice woodland pattern on here, something like a nice bull elk head or something. I think that'd make this look really good up on the wall. But all in all, it shoots pretty well. It works fine, looks nice up on the wall above the TV, and can't wait to do a few more of these.